So I wasn't planning to talk about the debate today, but then I thought maybe I should, because it's probably on a lot of people's minds and in their conversations, and it's in the headlines and so on. And maybe some people are hoping for a Dharma perspective, a Buddhist perspective on this situation. And so I looked at it for about 1 minute, probably less than a minute, and then I said, that's enough. And then I switched to something else. Really nice. It was a documentary called Infinite Potential. And it's about the life and work of physicist David Bohm, who the Dalai Lama called his science guru. So he had discussions with the Dalai Lama and also had discussions with Krishnamurti over several decades because he was very interested in consciousness and in spiritual teachings. The blurb about the film says, a brilliant physicist and explorer of consciousness, Bohm proposed a theory unifying relativity and quantum mechanics, two seemingly opposed explanations of observable phenomena. His profound insights into the underlying nature of reality and the interconnectedness of the universe and our place within it are truly far-reaching. And at one point in the film, he said something about the self that sounded very Buddhist. He said, the present ego identity is based on a wrong mode of thought in which a person identifies with his thoughts and with his body and with things, which means he's creating an illusion. The self that people feel they have is only a show. It's not really there, but it's such a convincing show that everyone thinks it is there, and that gives it an apparent reality. So I recommend this film, and if you haven't watched it, today's the last day you can watch it for free. Somebody sponsored it just for the month of September. So you just go to YouTube and Google Infinite Potential. Anyway, back to the debate. So I don't regret not watching the full thing and watching only a minute of it, because in this morning's news reports, words used like chaotic, childish, grueling, and it was watched by many people around the world. And the British newspaper, The Guardian, described it as a national humiliation and said the rest of the world and future historians will presumably look at it and weep, adding that Mr. Biden was the only man who looked remotely presidential on stage, and saying that if Mr. Trump was reelected in November, this dark, horrifying, unwatchable fever dream will surely be the first line of America's obituary. It's pretty heavy. And the Times in the UK wrote, the clearest loser from the first presidential debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden was America. The Times of India compared the debate to mud wrestling and said the United States embarrassed itself before the world for 100 minutes. So pretty disturbing, not very uplifting. But as people who've had the good fortune to learn the Dharma, and especially the Lojong thought transformation teachings, how can we respond to and deal with situations like this? So first of all, I think we need to watch our mind and not give in to feelings of anger and anxiety and despair. So it's natural that these kind of feelings would arise in our mind due to familiarity. We're used to feeling these kind of emotions. But are they helpful? Is it helpful to get angry? Is it helpful to have anxiety and despair and so on? So as the Buddha said, giving in to such feelings would be like shooting ourselves with another arrow, just making our suffering worse, making things worse rather than better. And there are alternatives. We do have a choice. That's really important to realize. We always have a choice about what we do with our mind, what we think, what we feel, how we look at things. So what are some things we can do? Over the past few months, I've had the good fortune to give talks on the 7-point mind training text by Geshe Chekawa, which is one of the original mind training texts. The teachings on mind training actually came to Tibet with Atisha, Mama Atisha, but they trace back to the Buddha, the Buddha's own teachings and teachings by Nagarjuna, Shantideva, and so on. But they were brought to Tibet by Lama Atisha. And then Geshe Chekawa was one of the first to actually write these teachings down. So I was invited by Amitabha Buddhist Center in Singapore to give talks on this. And as Venerable Nima said yesterday, I always find it really beneficial to have the chance to teach, because it makes the teachings much more deeply embedded in your own mind. So one line from that text says, "When the environment and its inhabitants overflow with unwholesomeness, transform adverse circumstances into the path to enlightenment." So for me, and I'm sure for many people, this particular aspect of the teachings is one of the most precious and beneficial aspects of the whole of Tibetan Buddhism. The idea of transforming adverse circumstances into the path is learning how to deal with bad things that happen, whether they happen to us personally, problems that we face in our life, or they're happening in a bigger sense, like in our country and the world and so on. So any kind of bad things that happen, the idea is to not let ourselves get caught up in disturbing emotions about them, because again, that's not helpful. And also there's the danger that we might not want to practice Dharma anymore. Sometimes people get so discouraged, depressed about problems that they just lose their energy to practice, to meditate and so on. So that would be very unfortunate. So trying to avoid those kinds of reactions. And then on top of that, we can even use such problems, such situations in our practice. We can use them to create merit, positive energy, which will bring better circumstances in the future, and help us to progress further on the path to enlightenment. So this line from the text, "When the environment and its inhabitants overflow with unwholesomeness," it's kind of a good description of what's happening right now in the world with COVID and all the problems related to that, economic problems, people losing their jobs, sometimes not having enough to eat, losing their homes, corruption in politics and in business, and the mental suffering that people are having. And then the environmental problems, all the forests burning and global warming and so on. So there's lots of problems. And we might sometimes think that things are worse than they were before, but I think we need to check again. I mean, we think about things that happened in the past, like World War II, not so long ago. Horrific things happening during that period of time. And then World War I, the Great Depression. And if we go further back in history, just horrific things have happened on this planet. And so is it possible to find any time in human history where things were wonderful and perfect and there was no suffering? Probably not. Maybe in certain places at certain periods of time, things were going okay, at least for some people, probably not for everybody. There was probably always those on the bottom who didn't have it good. And even for those who did have it good, how long did that situation last? Because good times don't last. Always things change, problems again reappear. So is it really the case that things are worse now than they were in the past? Probably not. And that's just thinking in conventional terms, looking at this world, this planet, this group of human beings. But in Buddhism, we talk about a much bigger situation, samsara, cyclic existence, which is much bigger than just this planet. It includes other realms, the universe, even other universes, and lots of problems, many, many, many problems, much worse than what we're going through now. So all ordinary beings, sentient beings, go through problems, not just one lifetime, but life after life after life after life. So from the Buddhist perspective, what's happening now is not unique, it's not unusual, it's just the norm. It's how things are in samsara. As long as we are in samsara, cyclic existence, then we'll just run into problems again and again. It's just the nature of samsara. So this is actually one way of transforming adverse circumstances, just seeing them as a reminder of samsara, cyclic existence, which we are in, and which is sometimes described in the teachings as a prison and as a great ocean filled with suffering. And I mean, this isn't to make us more depressed. That's not the road we're going down. But instead to help us generate renunciation, the determination to be free from this situation, because we can. It's not an eternal, permanent, unfixable situation. The Buddha found a way out, and he showed the way, and we have a chance to learn it and to follow it. So the Four Noble Truths, basically, there is suffering, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness all around us. And we need to look for the cause of it. Where's it coming from? It's coming from inside of ourselves, basically, our own mental afflictions, our disturbing emotions, which can be overcome. They're not permanent, they're not fixed. And there's a possibility of being free of this, the third noble truth, true cessation. And there's the path that leads to that. So contemplating the Four Noble Truths and then really generating the wish, not just the wish, but the determination to free ourselves from this situation. And beyond that, to generate the determination to reach Buddhahood, bodhicitta, aspiration to go all the way to full enlightenment, Buddhahood, so that we can help all other beings be free of this situation as well. So granted, that is a long way off. It does take a long time to reach enlightenment, but we can at least start. We can at least start to practice, to follow this path. And by doing so, following this path, even just making the first baby steps towards enlightenment, we're making our lives meaningful. We're living in a virtuous, positive, ethical way that's good for us, that's good for others. And so there are things we can do. So if we contemplate these points and generate these kind of thoughts, it shows us there is something we can do, even in the direst of conditions, which, I mean, they're not that bad compared to other situations that are being experienced by other beings. Other beings have things much worse than we do. And that becomes another method we can use in this kind of situation, thinking of the suffering of others and generating compassion. And also generating compassion for the people creating these problems. They deserve compassion too. Their minds are afflicted by ignorance, confusion, disturbing thoughts and emotions. So that's a really, really important method, one of my favorite, just to see all the suffering involved here and generate compassion. Because when our mind can be transformed into compassion, it's a much more soft and gentle and positive state of mind as compared to anger and despair and anxiety. And it's good for us, and it's good for the people around us. I really urge you to not fall into despair in these kind of situations, but see the positive side of it and transform such situations into the path, the benefit of yourself and others. Thank you.